And just as well, it's a long day and it's quite condensed, so if you need to take breaks at any point, that's absolutely fine to get up, or you need to take a mental health break or practice some of those exercises too. And it's all live streamed. There's a big TV out there too, so you don't have to miss out. Our next session is ADHD, Autism and Anxiety by clinical psychologist Dr. Lauren Brown. You can learn more about Lauren's professional career, but a fun fact that you won't see there is that she's actually a twin, and she's also very, very allergic to chocolate. So her gift bag with thank you afterwards will not have chocolate in it. So without further ado, Dr. Lauren Brown.
Hi everyone. Thank you for letting me speak today, and can I just give Mark a round of applause? This has been it's amazing what goes on in the background when it comes to something like this, so thank you. Okay, hopefully in half an hour I will be answering this question. We are not all on the spectrum. It really annoys me when people say that, and I'll tell you why. But I will be using half an hour to talk about that, and then I'll use, right, is there a bit of feedback? 15, is that me? I'll be using 15 minutes to talk through strategies for anxiety. My goal has been to target parents. You could like to use some strategies with your own kids, but they're also strategies I use, some of them, as a 40-year-old, so hopefully that'll help everybody. Thank you. All right, so if we go back to caveman days, I spend most of my time, most of my job is doing assessments for people with autism and ADHD. I do assessments with children and teenagers, but I also work with adults. I do assess adults as well. So a lot of my time is spent trying to understand the lived experience of someone with autism and with ADHD. I'm neurotypical. I don't know what it's like to live with those conditions. And the way I understand it is, in caveman days, tens of thousands of years ago, if you think of a clan of people, the most important thing for that clan of people was social cohesion. I think that's something Andrew actually touched on, is social connectedness. We had to be nice to each other, because if I was forced to leave the clan, I died. That's it. And so we developed certain ways of ensuring that there was social cohesion. Subtle things, picking up when you're annoyed with me. I'm talking too much in the conversation, I can sense that there's something going on, I need to stop and let you have a turn to speak. There are so many subtle ways in which we communicate as neurotypical people that neurodiverse people do not pick up always. But it was evolutionary. We needed it to be able to survive. But then we had wonderfully neurodiverse people, namely with ADHD and autism, who were also in the clan, and they were essential as well. If you think of the strengths of someone with autism, being able to focus on fine detail, being able to hyper-focus on a topic of interest, memory, the long-term memory of some people with autism, not everybody because we can't box people, but often people with autism have tremendous memories. There is a study, and if you're interested, go and have a look at it. You can just Google it, 2005 reindeer Siberian herder. Well, the study was done in 2005, and he was found to be autistic. He knew the migration patterns, the information on breeding of various types of reindeer, of thousands of different animals, really. And he was integral to the clan and the community. He didn't really like being around the community, he preferred being around reindeers, but he was essential to that community survival. If you think of the strengths of ADHD, being able to hyper-focus, certainly impulsivity, being able to scan the environment and be aware of all the cues coming from you all at once. Amazing when you had to think of danger in the environment, picking up on, I don't know, if there's an animal hiding in the bush somewhere. These sort of conditions that we've termed as disorders, ADHD and ASD, were actually essential to our survival. And I think really part of our legacy is humanity. So that's the first thing that I always try to do is see ADHD and autism through that lens, rather than it being a disorder. If you have opinions on autism and you feel it's being overdiagnosed, I think it's really important that you know the criteria of autism. I think it's something that I'm often in conversations and people say, oh, it's being overdiagnosed, everyone's autistic nowadays. And then I'll say, well, do you know the criteria for even diagnosing autism? And they don't. There are two categories of criteria for autism. There's the A's and the B's. A, there are 3, and the person needs to meet all 3 of them, A1, A2, A3. In terms of meeting the criteria, what I mean is the person needs to be showing something in all of these that is clinically significant. Now, that's an important term, really, in the whole field of psychology, because clinically significant is what really the determining line between disorder and what is typical, or in this case, neurodevelopmental conditions, and what is neurotypical. Clinically significant means that it's preventing that person from living a typical life. So I can be anxious and I can be depressed, but if it's not clinically significant, I can't be diagnosed with depression or generalized anxiety disorder, for example. And that's where you really need to see. So when I'm looking for autism as a diagnosis, I'm looking for clinically significant signs that this person is struggling in these 3 areas. I'm not going to go into them just for time, which I'm doing okay on. But if you want to know more about these, please speak to me afterwards. B's, there are 4 B criteria for diagnosis of autism. The person needs to meet 2 of them at least. So that's repetitive speech, inflexibility, rigidity, the intense or all-encompassing interests, or sensory. It really is just a mixed bag on what the person meets. I think that's why I love doing autism assessments, because I'm always interested in the B criteria. And if you are a GP or you are sort of one of the gatekeepers to more autism assessments, or you're wanting to refer for an autism assessment and you're not sure, just a tip would be hang out in the B section a lot, because a lot of kids with ADHD, a lot of kids who have experienced developmental trauma, they will meet the A criteria. And when I'm not sure in a diagnosis, what I normally do is then spend more time on the Bs, because you're not going to find someone with ADHD meeting the Bs. You will, however, find, they might meet the A criteria. So that's just a tip if you are, looking at assessing for autism. And the most important is, like I said, it has to be clinically significant. It has to be impacting that person's functioning. We're all a bit weird. We're all a bit quirky. I've been on a World War II phase at the moment where I'm just become really interested in World War II, but it's not impacting me clinically significantly. I've just assessed an 8-year-old. She met B3. Her current interest is slime. She knows facts about the history of slime. She talks about slime to the extent that her parents are now sick of slime. She can't concentrate on a lesson because she's thinking about slime. That's clinically significant. And that's why an autism assessment really needs to be thorough and comprehensive, because you've got to pick that apart. I'm very interested in, World War II, like I said. It's not coming up in every conversation I have. I'm able to function despite it. There are levels of autism in the DSM-5. It's intentionally vague. I find it helpful that it's so vague. And I think this is where it creates that idea that we're all a bit on the spectrum, because we sort of seem to see it as, we all kind of need a bit of support. And I think this is where that misconception comes from. So there's support, significant support, substantially significant support. I don't know, I could say substantially, I define it in one way and you define it in another way. It is helpful that it's quite vague. But I think what happens is that we then see autism as a gradient. So a gradient of color is pale red to dark red. And that's where it comes up, where we're like, she's a bit autistic. She doesn't look autistic, which I also hate when people say that. I don't know what autistic looks like, but no, they don't look autistic. So they might be pale red. But someone who, if you've seen Love on the Spectrum, those people, their autistic signs are a little bit more obvious. Perhaps they're nonverbal, perhaps they are living in a home somewhere and they can't live independently. They might be dark red. That's a complete misconception of how autism presents. It is a spectrum, which is why it's the autism spectrum. And the color spectrum consists of 7 colors. It would be like saying, blue's only a little bit on the spectrum, but red's a lot on the spectrum. No, they're both on the spectrum. And
that's why it's helpful to look at autism as a spectrum because, for example, someone might have very extreme difficulties with sensory processing to the degree that they've also got an eating disorder because they struggle so much with sensory slimy yogurt, for example, which is what I see a lot, actually. And then they might actually cope well in a social setting. They might have learned specific social skills that are helping them to cope. That person's going to present very differently to someone who really struggles with language, who actually doesn't want to even speak because they struggle so much with language, or perhaps their motor skills are not as well developed. So I think why it's so helpful to see it as a spectrum is because then you can also understand why each person on the spectrum presents so differently. You know, there might be, if we look at it this way, there might be lots of yellow, a little bit of red, a touch of blue on one person, and then, you know, another sort of color spectrum for another person. And that's why people present so differently with autism. But you have to have those criteria. It doesn't mean that everyone's on the spectrum just because, you know, you don't really like to look at people in the eye when you're talking to them. So why the rise in ASD and ADHD diagnoses? If you think about it, it's so obvious. Why shouldn't there be a rise in ADHD diagnoses? I think the first thing is that these are relatively new diagnoses. Cancer, heart attacks, that kind of thing, they're such obvious illnesses. You know, there's stories of sort of, I don't know, in how many BC with Egyptians, who there was evidence there of them grappling with something like a cancer diagnosis. A tumor is very visible, something that you can see when you operate. Autism, you can't see it. An autism diagnosis, or an assessment at least, takes hours of talking and working and figuring out. So really, autism only became understood as a formal diagnosis in around 1940. And if you compare that to, 5,000 BC, when cancer sort of people became more aware of cancer, that's a lot of time that we've had to study cancer versus being able to really study autism. The next is a change in diagnostic criteria. You would have heard DSM-5. It's been something that's referred to by the other speakers. It changed in 2013. It changed quite dramatically, actually. It changed the way we diagnose a lot of these conditions or disorders, also mental health disorders. I'm not going to go into it, but that is one of the things that impacted really the medical community when it comes to these kind of things. So it was a change in diagnostic criteria. The age of information. When I was thinking about the speech, I was going to say, okay, 20 years ago when I was a child, but then I was like, 20 years ago I was 20. So 30 years ago when I was a child, my mom had, 30 years ago when we were all kids, hopefully, our parents had what? Maybe a book on parenting to look at, with one chapter on feeding, for example, grandparents to speak to, or parents, and then friends, that's it. Now, you can be on a parenting Facebook group with people in Canada. And so what's happened is there's been such a lot of information all of a sudden that we have access to, and people's stories. I have so many of my teenage clients come to me and say, I'm autistic. And I say, well, why do you think that? Well, because I've got Instagram pages, I've watched online. So they're diagnosing themselves because of the information that we have. And like I said, 30 years ago, when I was that age, I certainly didn't have access to that kind of information. I think this is really the reason, one of the biggest reasons why there's such an increase in diagnoses. And that's really since, when did we start with Facebook and all of that? It was around 2005, 2008. So no wonder there's been this massive boom and an increase in diagnoses, because all of a sudden people are saying, hey, my child does that. The next is better diagnostic tools. The ADOS, for example, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, it was only created in 1990. It's one of the gold standard autism diagnostic tools that you use. The toddler version only came out in 2012. The CAT-Q, which is the Camouflaging Autistic Traits Questionnaire, came out in 2018. So all of a sudden, because we've had this sort of snowball of information and diagnosis, we're getting a lot more diagnostic tools which are really useful to try and identify these traits. The next is parenting. Now, I've set a bit of a question mark there. Firstly, I think there's a change in parenting. Parents are now advocates of their kids. It wasn't like that so much 50 years ago. The whole thing of kids must be seen and not heard. Now parents fight for their children to a degree that is more than it was 50, 60 years ago. Also, and this is why I said a question mark, and it's tricky to say this because I don't want to shame parents, but parenting is tough. And I think what I've realized about parenting and the change in parenting is that a lot of parents are extremely isolated. I often say to parents, who supports you? I know no one. There's no extended family. Grandparents are living in another country. They don't have anyone to help them, to teach them how to raise their kids. And because of that, we've got parents who are parenting who don't have help and don't really know how to parent. And so, I don't know if any of you have watched Super Nanny. She's an interesting lady. Some of her things I think are good. I think she's good at setting boundaries. I wouldn't recommend some of her parenting strategies, but I do think I respect what she teaches. And if you ever watched one of her shows, the kids in her shows can present like they have ADHD. And I think this is where I really want to be careful, because just because your child is misbehaved doesn't mean they have ADHD. And also, sorry, I really don't want to shame parents, but what I'm saying is that sometimes if there have been very few boundaries when it comes to parenting, it can present as ADHD. To the extent that in the UK, I was working in the UK before I moved to Australia, they only diagnose ADHD after the age of 6. And what's interesting is guidelines say that when the child is sent for an ADHD assessment, the parents have to do a parenting course as well. Now, the guidelines say that a parenting course shouldn't prevent access to the assessment. Several of the clinics I was working at, they would refuse to assess before the parents had done the parenting course. Because what we were finding was there are certain parenting strategies that can be put into place that actually help control what could be seen as ADHD, but actually wasn't. So, highly controversial, another thing for another time, but that is something that they're seeing in the UK, and why they won't diagnose before you've done a parenting course, and only after age of 6. Masking is also a very interesting topic for me. Masking is specifically to do with autism. It is when people camouflage their autistic traits. I often speak to parents who tell me their child is masking. They're masking their dyslexia, so they spell perfectly, but they're masking. They're masking their autism, their ADHD. I'm sure, is anyone a teacher in here? Okay, can we clap for the teachers, please? Because you guys are angels, really. So I often speak to the teachers, and then the teachers say, your child is doing well at school, they look happy, they're masking. You're nodding, I'm sure. So masking has got nothing to do with ADHD and dyslexia. You cannot mask concentration. If you're concentrating, you're concentrating. You can't be pretending to concentrate, but actually not concentrating. There's got nothing to do with, but I think it's a word we're using a lot. And it's not fair. It's not fair on autistic people, because masking is specifically to do with autism. So if you do have parents coming to you and say, my child's masking, the first question I say is, what are they masking? And often I'm like, met with a blank, no, I don't know. People with autism mask their autistic traits to present as neurotypical. I have a wonderful client who's actually given me permission to share about her today. I won't tell you her name. She's on the autism spectrum. She masks all the time. Things she masks are, she forces herself to speak to people and look at them in the eye. She hates eye contact. She said it feels like people are looking into her soul. She masks her preference to not have eye contact because she knows it comes across as rude. She has a tendency, one of her sort of autistic traits is to overshare, because that is something very important to people on the spectrum. Information is important. If you're being rude, you need to know you're being rude. I was told the other day by an 8-year-old client, also on the spectrum, that I am very boring. Now, I was like a bit taken aback, but I realized that's important information. I need to know that I'm being boring. She also told me that day that I smell great, so that was good to know. But she has a tendency to overshare. Now, she knows that gets her into trouble, so she's very aware of what she's saying. She's not sure of when she overshares and when she doesn't overshare. but she knows that she mustn't. Can you imagine how exhausting that must be? She also knows that in conversation, it's polite for someone else to speak. Now, often autistic people have a tendency to, like I said, share a lot of information, and it feels a little bit like, oh, it's information overload, when can I speak? So she knows that. So she counts in her mind, okay, I've had about 10 seconds, now they have to have 10 seconds. Now, I, as a neurotypical person, I don't think like that, I don't operate like that. And that's where we get burnout, autistic burnout. So that is masking. Can I just ask how much time I have? Can't remember what time I had.
Sorry, you're not boring.
Thank you. Well, according to the 8-year-old I am. Okay, great. So please, if you can't mask every, neurodevelopmental condition out there. You can mask your autistic traits. So one of the things I often tell my kids, I don't have kids of my own, but I do have clients, is living with autism and ADHD is like being left-handed in a right-handed world. Are there any lefties in this room? See, look how few there are. Oh, Mark's a lefty. There's so few, and then we really need to look after them because it's tough. It's tough being a lefty in a right-handed world. It's inconvenient. I mean, look at the examples I've given. I love that because I've said that to left-handed people. Oh, are you left-handed? I mean, how do you even, I don't even know how to respond to that, yes. And so being autistic and being on the spectrum, it's like being a lefty in a right-handed world. There's nothing wrong with being left-handed. It makes you pretty cool, actually. It's just inconvenient. And I often think of Autistic Island. That's what I have in my mind. Autistic Island is, if we lived on an island with only autistic people, what would it look like? There would be no bright lights. There'd be no auditorium like this. But whoever designed this auditorium, I actually want to have a word with them, because why are there 2 screens? It's so confusing. Why are there no lanes down the middle? What if there's a fire? Then we've all got to wait. Sorry, excuse me. It's just very badly designed. And so it's inconvenient to be neurodiverse in a world built for neurotypical people. It's like being a lefty in a right-handed world. So if you have a child on the spectrum or a friend, or this is a nice way just to understand their lived experience. They can do it. They really can. It's just inconvenient. So I hope that helps you just to understand that we're not all on the spectrum. Just like red is not a little bit on the spectrum, it is on the spectrum. And also, that while autistic people and people with ADHD have a little bit of a hard time in society, it's certainly not their fault. And also, it's part of our legacy as humans. We need them. We've needed them in order to survive since we were cavemen, really. So, thank you. The next little bit I just quickly wanted to touch on is anxiety. I'm really hoping that these are little snippets of just what I do with kids. I have a lot of therapy clients. Most of it is anxiety related. And I work with parents a lot about anxiety, so hopefully this will help. I think the first thing if it comes to your child having anxiety is, and what I always do is monitor your anxiety about their anxiety. Parents are anxious when it comes to their child's anxiety, and what you might be doing actually is giving off a bit of a message to them that their anxiety is a problem. So that's the first thing I always do when I work with parents about their child's anxiety is, how do you feel about your child's anxiety? How do you feel about how you're doing when it comes to helping your child with their anxiety? That's the first thing you could have a look at. Second is some anxiety is normal. I think another thing which like I said, I often work with parents, there's so much pressure on parents at the moment for their child never to hurt. Anxiety is normal. It's a normal part of life. This is the anxiety curve. It looks at optimal arousal, optimal performance, and anxiety. And you can see when anxiety raises, there is a perfect sort of point on that anxiety curve when arousal, attention, concentration is optimal. So I was a little bit anxious about this talk. What it did was make me prepare. It made me sit down and think about what I was going to say. If I wasn't anxious, I'd just rock up here and I don't know what I would say. But the anxiety motivated me. So some anxiety is good. It's a good thing. The next is allow your child to feel anxious. I think a lot of the time we just don't allow kids to feel. Also for yourself, allow yourself to feel anxious. It's okay. So often I see parents, don't feel anxious or don't worry, we're going to fix it. It's just like, if you come up to me and we have a long chat and you tell me all the things you're worried about, and then I say, don't worry. I mean, how helpful is that? It's awful. Allow it, it's okay. The next one, which is really helpful for kids, is to use a worry scale. I actually use this for myself as well. Where on a scale of 1 to 10 do you feel? 0 means nothing at all, 10 meaning I want to die, I'm so anxious. And then what's nice with kids is to say, okay, if you're at a 7, how can we get you down to a 5? Because also it takes the pressure of you as a parent to sort of fix everything. And it's a lot more realistic to get from a 7 to a 5 than it is to be at a 0 all the time. That's a nice strategy you could use. The monster in the cupboard. I use this a lot for myself. When I was small, I was terrified of monsters, and I would often sense a monster in the cupboard. And if there was like a hanger or a coat or something hanging around in my room, it felt like that's the monster. And then I'd turn the light on and I'd realize, it's just the jacket. And what we do often is we don't finish our worries. In other words, we just feel vaguely anxious. Oh, I'm worried about my family. Well, what are you worried about? So a good sort of phrase to use, and you can use this especially with teenagers, is and then. I'm worried I'm going to fail my exam. And then? Well, and then you'll be cross with me. And then? And then you'll get over it? Okay, and then? So it's a nice way to sort of speak through their worries, speak through your own worries, and just help them to finish it, because we live in this sort of sense of vague anxiety, but, if you actually sit and think, what am I worried about? It can be quite refreshing to realize, well, maybe it's not going to be as bad as I'm thinking it's going to be. The next, this is so nice for teenagers, is if they come to you and they're sharing, is to just ask them, what do you need from me? Do you want advice, or do you want me to listen? I am completely convinced we speak way too much to kids and to teenagers. The amount of times I've had kids as young as 6 say to me after a session, thank you for listening to me. Kids especially, need to be listened to. And so what is nice is if you're not too sure what your child needs, is ask them, do you want my advice or do I need to listen more? They'll tell you. Then let them. Has anyone heard of the let them theory? Oh, it's lovely. Let them is, I've seen it tattooed on people. It's sort of a little thing going around nowadays on Instagram, and it's basically let them. Someone's driving and they cut you off in traffic, and then they go speeding along, and you think, what a dumb person, I'm so angry. Let them. I had it the other day with a family situation. My cousin and certain decisions she's making around the birth of her child, and I was getting so angry, and I phoned my mom, and I said, I can't believe they're doing this, and I was like, let them. Obviously, it's not situations that you can control. If there's a situation you can control and you have an impact on, it's different. But this let them sort of idea has really sort of gained movement, and I find it very helpful, especially with things where there's no control. Just let him drive in traffic. Zones of regulation. If there are any parents with young kids in this auditorium, please use zones of regulation. It is fantastic. A lot of the Australian schools are using it. Most schools are using it, actually. There we go, the teachers are thumbs upping. It's such a wonderful way to look at emotions. You can have a little zones of regulation chart stuck on your fridge. If you're in the blue zone, you're sad, tired. Green zone is really optimal. Yellow zone, you're frustrated, worried, silly, excited. Red zone is angry. It's great to be able to come to your child and say, oh, I'm also feeling a bit in the red zone. Mom needs a bit of space. Or, what zone are you in on the way to school? So have a Google of it if it's something that resonates with you. But I do recommend parents bring it into their parenting tool of tricks. Stick it on your fridge and make it part of the household vocabulary. It also helps your child to... Emotions can be so tricky for kids to fully understand. If you've got a colour, it can really be easier for them. And then, like I said, listen. Like I said, we speak way too much to our children. They don't need to hear so many words from us. Listen to them. It's the biggest... If I was a parent, or if I had any kind of parenting advice for you here, based on my experience as a psychologist, I would say just listen more. When to seek professional help. This is what I often get asked with parents who come to see me. How bad is bad when it comes to anxiety? Again, clinically significant. Is it impacting your child's ability to lead a typical life? If they struggle with separation anxiety every 2 weeks or so, and they're feeling a bit down, and they're clingy, and they won't go to school, that's not impacting their ability to lead a typical life. If they're doing that every day for a month, that's clinically significant. So use that. It's quite a useful little measure. So that is it in terms of anxiety. I did say questions or comments, but I know that you'd prefer to have that in the... Yeah.
Did you have about an extra 5 minutes?
Would anyone like to ask a question? No? Okay. Great. Thank you so much for listening to me.
One, two, thank you so much. Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren. I would say that I'm guilty of some of those broad comments that you mentioned, but I feel so much more informed now. It's definitely, I think, a lot of us have benefited from that, and I think definitely as a parent, I know with my emotions they can affect the kids, and Mark said, don't feed off the kids, but and my positive and negative emotions, so it's really good. And I think listening as well is one of the things, like sometimes the kids say, which do you think, should I wear this or this? It's like, well, I learned to say, well, what do you think? That was the best way out, rather than this one. Oh, okay, I'll choose that one. So it's good. It's definitely, this was so educational. Now, we actually have time for afternoon tea break, but it's about 15 minutes. Please do not leave the building. There is going to be a great talk from Andrew about healing addiction and trauma, and there's also a panel coming up. I would encourage you to visit the stalls that we have out there, which you may not have seen at lunch because we're all busy around the tables. There is a math stand, there is a 13-6 stand, there is the MIPS stand, and there's also a donation stand. This is amazing. A lot of you, I see, I've got hoodies and different things from there. If you make a donation of different amounts, whatever, you can get a free gift. So it's incredible. Please go and do that. The money goes to Papua New Guinea, and I think the coffee is still running. If you want to get one just for the afternoon session to get you, it is still running if you want it to get you through. So please enjoy, have a break, stretch your legs, do your breathing, bathroom, and we'll be back here at 15, 20 minutes. Thank you.